Good morning. Welcome to Iron Sharpens Iron. My name is Jeremy Nettles. I am the evangelist for the River Ridge Church of Christ that meets in Newburgh, Indiana at 5600 Van Road. If you would like to join us for our Sunday morning worship, then you can get there at 10 o'clock, and we would love to have you with us. You can also get there an hour early and then be a part of our Bible classes starting at 9. We have classes for all ages, and we also have another installment of those classes on Wednesday evenings at 6:30. As well as another worship period on Sunday afternoons at 4. If you'd like to get in touch with us, then please feel free to give us a call or send a text to 812-550-6234 or send an email to info@riverridgechurch.org. Those are great ways to get in touch with us for a comment or a question or a request for a topic to be addressed on this program. We also have a radio show every Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. on 98.5 FM as well as 1400 AM, which you can get a little farther out from Evansville. And if you would like to check our YouTube channel, you can find us at youtube.com/River Ridge Church of Christ. I have quietly established a new series, actually a few months ago, when we looked at the first several chapters of the book of Genesis. And we talked about the sort of the earliest ages of man. And then we also did another installment looking specifically at the patriarchs of the nation of Israel. Well, that got us through the book of Genesis, and I'm going to continue, as I have opportunity, going through the different ages. It's not going to be book by book or anything close to it, but looking rather at long periods of time and then summarizing what was God doing during those periods of time. What was his major activity in the world, so to speak, and how was he driving forward the story of history that he wrote before the foundation of the world. You can always go back to the YouTube channel and watch previous installments and catch up on these sorts of things if you have missed them, and that will be useful since, obviously, each new era will build on what God did with the previous one, but I also designed them as standalone, so it's easy to jump in wherever you are. So, to recap, Israel's patriarchs, those were Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob's sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. This whole crew ends up living in Egypt because of, well, some things that happened between Joseph and the rest of his brothers, leading to, decades later, a great famine in which the not only Egypt but also the land of Canaan was very short on food, but because of Joseph's wise management of the resources available to him, learned through periods in which God was deliberately teaching him how to do that, but I digress. Jacob's whole family ends up relocating to be where Joseph is, because he's sort of the tall man on the totem pole, so to speak, in Egypt. Now, it's not as if this was completely unforeseen. In fact, if we go back to Genesis chapter 15, then even in the days of Abraham, we can see God predicting this to Abraham. Genesis 15, beginning in verse 12. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. And they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And this was not completely a one-off. In Genesis chapter 46, we find God telling Jacob, well, something very similar. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So obviously what he told Abraham was, well, kind of dark. In fact, that was the setting around that vision. There's this great darkness that had fallen on Abraham, and that doesn't seem to be purely a physical darkness, but it's sort of an emotional, mental, spiritual darkness as well, tied to this prediction of bondage in Egypt. And then here again, we've got Jacob obviously feeling some sense of trepidation about relocating his family away from the land that God had promised to give to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and to their descendants forever, and then going to a different place, Egypt, and, well, what's going to happen there? This is a jump into the unknown, and it's frankly kind of scary. Now we find ourselves in the middle of this, let's say, very dark period with not very much information, and all the information that we get is pretty discouraging. In Exodus chapter 1, we pick up after the deaths of Joseph and the whole rest of all of his brothers, the whole rest of that family, as we move on with their descendants. Exodus 1, beginning in verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and, if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So the local government is afraid of the Israelites, and they deliberately want to sort of keep them down. And the methods by which they go about doing this include, first of all, slave labor. But it doesn't end there because it doesn't work yet. So Pharaoh ends up resorting to mass infanticide as a result. And you might remember that story. The Pharaoh goes to the Israelites' midwives and tells them, whenever you go to deliver a baby born to the Israelites, if it's a girl, fine. If it's a boy, kill it. And you might ask, how in the world could anyone expect a midwife, of all people, to go along with infanticide like this? It's not substantially different from today's abortion industry, however. Historically, it was actually fairly common to dispose of a newborn who had an obvious defect, or wasn't the desired sex, or was unwanted in general for other reasons. Considering the very high rates of stillbirth and infant mortality in the ancient world, perhaps it's more understandable that many ancient peoples developed a calloused outlook toward infant deaths. Side note, we're the oddballs today on this, for at least wrestling with the morality of killing an unwanted baby in or out of the womb. Why did people develop more of a conscience about this topic, you might ask? Because God showed the Jews how evil it was, and then sent his Son to earth in part to spread the moral standards he'd given to the Jews to the rest of the world. But I digress. How did this plan work? Well, it didn't. Or at least Pharaoh's plan didn't, but of course God's plan was working exactly as he wrote it up. And so then the next thing we find is Moses' birth, and you might remember how he was hidden, even though he was supposed to have been killed in infancy. He was hidden for about 3 months until, we can't hide him anymore, and his mother ends up putting him into a basket and floating him down the river, where he is picked up by the daughter of Pharaoh and raised among the Egyptians. That doesn't go as well as they might have hoped, because he grows up and he knows that he's a Hebrew. He wants to go and check on his people and see how they are doing, and he ends up out of this this feeling of solidarity with the Hebrews. He ends up killing an Egyptian who is giving a beating to a fellow Hebrew. And once Moses learns that this has been discovered, it's becoming common knowledge that he has done this, he figures he should probably get out of there, and so he does. He flees to the wilderness. He spends 40 years in the wilderness, but we're only going to read a small snippet right at the end of his stay there, in Exodus chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, "Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" He said, "But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you, that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." Then Moses said to God, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.'" What a great promise for Moses and for the rest of the Israelites. God has a plan to redeem his people out of slavery. For now, they don't get to make their own choices. They don't get to leave or to refuse their own labor, but he is going to free them and repurpose them. Are you seeing any New Testament parallels yet? See, this is more than just the history of the Israelites. It predicts God's plan for an eternal redemption from slavery to sin. So after a little bit more grousing, Moses eventually goes back to Egypt, and he makes the pitch before Pharaoh, beginning in chapter 5, verse 1. "Afterward Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, 'Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness.'" Now, considering what God had just told Moses that we read back in chapter 3, all of those words are true. But they're not the entire truth, are they? Because it's obvious, and Pharaoh can even tell, that the idea behind this is not just that the Israelites are going to leave, go hold a feast to the Lord in the wilderness, and then turn around, come back, and get back to work. Now that seems to be the implication, or at least something that Moses is willing to allow Pharaoh to infer, even if it's not actually the truth. And Pharaoh, well, either he sees through it, or he just doesn't trust it. He figures, why in the world would I allow my prized labor force to just, leave and go out in the wilderness with no supervision and no way that I could possibly compel them to return? This is crazy. And so he says, verse 2, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover I will not let Israel go." There's some back and forth. Moses calls down a plague on the Egyptians, and then another and another and another. There are eventually 10 in all, culminating in chapter 11, verses 4 through 10. "So Moses said, 'Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle. There shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been, nor ever will be again. But not a dog shall growl against any of the people of Israel, either man or beast, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. And all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, Get out, you and all the people who follow you, and after that I will go out.' And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go out of his land." There are more parallels here, aren't there? This is not just about God's plan to redeem the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. It's also first of all going to be an occasion that he wants to be commemorated on an annual basis called the Passover Feast. It's associated with the Feast of Unleavened Bread, by the way. It also is tied in with the consecration of the firstborn, which he gets into in chapter 13. But all of those things sort of roll together into a hazy, but still there, picture of the Messiah, don't they? Jesus, who is, of course, the firstborn of God himself. He is the heir of God himself. And he also is the Passover lamb, the pure, unblemished Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, who, in a sense, was also killed in order to satisfy the righteous wrath of God over sin. We got to move on, though. Chapter 12, verse 30. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron by night and said, Up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as you have said. Jumping down to verse 40, the time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night of watching by the Lord, to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So this same night is a night of watching kept to the Lord by all the people of Israel throughout their generations. This seems like it signifies the shifting of an era. That's a fair assessment of it. We're actually only told a tiny bit of this story of the Exodus. Nearly 500 years passed between Jacob's journey to Egypt and the eventual conquest of the Promised Land, which seems like it's forever away, but it's really not that far. In total, only like a few months of the story are narrated for us between those two benchmarks. Moses guides the people through many obstacles, through the wilderness, through the Red Sea, through their thirst and their hunger and their thirst again, and being attacked by a hostile nation, and plenty of internal squabbles, until they come to Mount Sinai in chapter 19. On the third new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain, while Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. So Moses came and called the elders of the people, and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, All that the Lord has spoken we will do. At Mount Sinai, God and Israel inaugurate a covenant. And this bears a striking similarity to a marriage. Up until now has been the courting phase, in which God was showing his interest in the Israelites and also demonstrating to them his ability to provide for them and to protect them. And he rescued them from their harsh master. These are all the sorts of things that the prospective groom wants to do in order to win the hand of his bride. Now, God has every right to command the Israelites, of course, because he's God, but he severely limits that authority up to this point, and he doesn't even punish the Israelites' faithlessness in the early months of their relationship. Here, he much more clearly proposes marriage, and they accept. Not one for long engagements. God immediately follows this up with the ceremony. Vows are given. Essentially, here are the rules. Chapter 20, verse 1. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you, or your son, or your daughter, your male servant, or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. God is going to be the head of this household in an even greater sense than he was before. And what is the response of the Israelites after many more laws are given? Well, chapter 24, verse 3... Then Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the rules. And all the people answered with one voice and said, All the words that the Lord has spoken we will do. This is essentially God saying, I do, and them saying, I do. Now it's time to set up housekeeping. How does God want his house to be arranged? Well, that's the topic of Exodus chapters 25 through 40 and all of Leviticus and a good part of Numbers. It's interspersed with Israel's many failures, including what amounts to committing adultery on the honeymoon. To continue the analogy, that's chapter 32, the golden calf incident. Moses intercedes between God and the people, and they reconcile, although with some changes in the relationship. They constantly complain, they constantly rebel. The worst comes when God is just ready to lead the Israelites into the promised land, and in Numbers chapter 14 they refuse, verses 1 through 4. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to one another, "Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Well, this is pretty ridiculous, and God is not pleased. There are consequences for their rebellion when he has said, "All right, it's time to go up," and they've said, No. We prefer the old slavery. We don't want you anymore, or any of your promises." As a result of this, God sentences them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. Time for that entire generation of adults to die out and be replaced by their children, whom they were afraid would become a prey in the promised land. And God says, fine, I'll give it to them instead. He has given his people wonderful promises and assurances, demonstrations, tastes of the blessings to come, and yet they resist. They stubbornly yearn for that old life of slavery. Nevertheless, the promise stands. In Joshua chapter 1, let's read verses 1 through 6. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, "Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon I have given to you, just as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites and the great sea toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them." Well, the rest of the book of Joshua covers the conquest of this promised land, as well as its allotment out to the various tribes. Is the situation everything that they hoped and dreamed? Is it perfect? Well, no. For this we jump forward to the book of Judges, chapter 1, and let's begin in verse 27. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and its villages, or of Taanach and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. When Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. And Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, so the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron or the inhabitants of Nahalol, so the Canaanites lived among them, but became subject to forced labor. And this continues. God had said that he would drive all of these people out before them, so what's the deal? Whose fault is this? Chapter 2, verse 1. Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt, and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall break down their altars. But you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare to you. Ah. So it's not that God was, metaphorically speaking, a bad husband. It's not that God had failed to provide or protect. It's not that God had failed to keep his word. He is actually more than able. He was willing to deliver on all of these things, and he often did deliver on these promises, even in spite of his bride's unfaithfulness. Any faults and imperfections in this particular marriage are on Israel, not on God. But once again, I hasten to add that this is not just about Israel. This is about all of us. We're the ones who consistently fail to show faithfulness to God. We forget him, as Israel did while they were enslaved to Egypt for 400 years. We resist being rescued by him because, well, it's just easier to stay in the misery that we know than to leap into the great unknown at God's direction. We show a great lack of endurance because, God gives us promises and we think it sounds great until it presents a challenge to us. We are dissatisfied with the blessings that he provides. We say, we have nothing to eat and we hate this stupid bread from heaven. That is nearly a direct quote from Numbers 21:5. We are dissatisfied with the leaders that he gives us. Moses was always teetering on the brink of a violent uprising. We are dissatisfied with the laws that he gives us, but we really like those idols. And fornicating. Not much has changed, huh? We become afraid of earthly dangers and allow those to lead us into disobedience, as when the Israelites were told, "Go up and take the land," and they said, But there's giants over there. Nevertheless, God's promised rest remains, laid up for his chosen people. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. See, I'm not the only one noticing these parallels. The author of Hebrews noticed them as well, and he implies that David recognized them too. This is to be capped off when we cross another metaphorical gulf as the Israelites crossed the Jordan River, and we cross through death into the promised rest. Once again, God is more than able to give us what he has promised. The question is simply this: will we be faithful to him? What's your answer to that? Where are you in this allegorical journey? Are you ready to enter into that rest? Are you in a period of wandering the earth, learning God's ways and building his house? Maybe you are rebelling against his established rules. Maybe you're cheating on him with other gods, whether you give them personal names and images or just worship and serve these things in the abstract, which is the same thing. Maybe you are newly redeemed and doing your best to follow where God leads, but you're still not fully attached to Christ. Or maybe you are still a slave to an evil master. A beautiful aspect of God's eternal plans is that while there are trends and mass movements where lots of people go through the same things at the same time, like with Israel, additionally, each individual isn't necessarily left behind when the masses move. God is interested in you specifically being redeemed from sin and entering his rest. And he will guide you through the wilderness that is this world, and he will provide for you in ways that you thought were impossible. And you won't be alone. God makes the same appeal and the same proposal to everyone, and there are older and more experienced brothers and sisters in Christ who can help you to navigate the difficult early steps. Even if you can't find this kind of companionship on earth, you will still find spiritual companionship with Israel's story. But we'd love to help you along at River Ridge. You can get in touch with us by phone at 812-550-6234 or email us at info@riverridgechurch.org. And you can also visit us at 5600 Van Road in Newburgh for Sunday morning worship at 10. I hope to see you there. Thanks for joining me today on Iron Sharpens Iron.